morning, students. Today we are going to see the second subtopic of Unit 3, that is Framework for Assessing Climate Vulnerability. So, this is the introduction part of Climate Vulnerability Framework. Climate change has significant impact on freshwater resources, ecosystems, and societies. So, in the last class, we have seen the important factors the climate change have tremendous impact. Okay, especially the freshwater resources, ecosystems. It relies on not only the human, it also other living beings like trees and even birds, okay, aquatic life and things like that, and the societies. Okay, so the society again, the humans, okay, the interaction between the humans, everything. I mean, the society is the human, what they mean here. Okay, the climate change has significant impact on freshwater resources, ecosystems, and societies. Understanding the vulnerability is crucial to design effective adaptation strategies. So we need to reduce the vulnerability. Okay, so the main purpose of the climate change, okay, that we need to go and adapt to make a uh, optimize adaptation, okay, reduce the vulnerability and effective adaptation strategies. The framework highlights the interlinkages between exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So the research framework, I mean here they what they mean is the framework for assessing climate vulnerability. The framework highlights the interlinkages between the exposure, okay, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. I'll show in the next diagram, okay, which has been taken from the internet source. Okay, we will discuss about the research framework, highlights the interlinkages between the exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Freshwater resources are highly sensitive to temperature, precipitation, and extreme weather events. Okay, so let's say if you have a very hot sunny, okay, so obviously what happens, the precipitation evaporation will be more, okay, as well as the temperature is getting heated up, and you don't get a proper rainfall, that is less precipitation, obviously the water resource will be less. So water resources are highly sensitive to this temperature, precipitation, and extreme weather events. Assessing vulnerability provides a foundation for better policy making. Okay, how much vulnerable, I mean, because of this activity, the climate change, okay, we need to assess the vulnerability, that will help you to come out with a spontaneous reaction. Okay, that means we'll take decision based on the immediate action or by means of the policy making, for which we need to know the historical data and the current data, why this is deviating, and obviously it's because of the anthropogenic activities, the climate change. So the vulnerability assessment is very important factor. That's what we are going to study in this lecture. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change plays a central role in guiding this framework globally. Okay, the IPCC plays a central role in guiding this framework. That means the vulnerability, assessing the climate vulnerability. There is a need for framework for assessing the climate vulnerability. And coming to here, the threat. What is the threat? What are the things which is happening because of the climate change? Air temperature will increase, humidity will reduce, rainfall will be more or less, depending on the situation. The storms and cyclones may arise. Hydrology, how it affects the water, river discharge, water levels may increase or decrease, flood depth and duration, sea level rise. Hydrodynamics, river water temperature may increase, okay, overflow velocity, river bank erosion may take place, that is not safe for the people who have been living very close to the river bank, okay, bay of river. Okay, so the channel and floodplain water levels, and these are the threat. The vulnerability, the exposure, how much time the threat has been exposed, duration, location, magnitude, intensity, and aspect. Multiplied by the sensitivity. So design, material, siting, and maintenance is very particular how it has been affected. Okay, and the impact is overtopping, the score and washout, blockage of drains, loss of strength, bearing capacity, disruption to traffic, areas become isolated, reduces design life. So these are the impact. So the exposure and the sensitivity, okay, leads to equal to the impact. And adaptive capacity. So the adaptive capacity, whether it's a resilience back, I mean the resilience planning, Okay, so resilience planning in the sense, okay, it could what you call the resilience need to be maintained, right? So the adaptive capacity, whether um, whether it is within the threshold or not. So what is the adaptive capacity? The technologies, okay, material supply, financial resources, expertise and staffing, management systems, and policies and procedures. This slide has been taken from the internet source. Okay, I acknowledge the internet source. Actually, this one. And coming to the role of IPC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was established by the World Meteorological Organization (WMO) and UNEP United Nations Environmental Programme to assess the climate science comprehensively. IPC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports evaluate climate impact on hydrological processes, freshwater resources, and adaptation options. Technical papers such as climate change and water provide detailed sectoral insights. Okay, so you go to the website of IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. There are a lot of technical papers such as climate change and water, provide detailed sectoral insights. The fourth assessment report synthesizes emphasizes key vulnerabilities in ecosystem and human societies. IPCC aims to improve scientific understanding and support policy decisions. Stakeholders, including governments, use this assessment for planning climate resilience measures. So, climate resilience measures. So, what are the things which we are planning? Okay, in order to regain back or in order to adapt ourselves, okay, to the climate change. That is very important. Defining vulnerability, it is a degree to which a system is susceptible to and unable to cope with the climate impact. Okay, it includes sensitivity to climate variability and inability to adapt effectively. It is not static, it is dynamic, influenced by social, economic, environmental, and economic conditions. Systems like agriculture, health, and water management demonstrate varying levels of vulnerability. So we will go one by one and we will see actually what is vulnerability in agriculture field or health and water management. Vulnerability analysis enables identification of population or sectors most at risk. This definition is foundational for framing climate adaptation and mitigation strategies. The framework for climate vulnerability. Okay, so why we need to study? Because vulnerability analysis enables identification of population or sectors most at risk. It is a degree of which the system is susceptible to and unable to cope up with climate impact. So vulnerability is a degree to which the system is susceptible to and unable to cope up with climate impact. Vulnerability is composed of three key elements. One is exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. What is exposure? Exposure highlights how often to what extent a system experiences climate changes. So, the exposure is one thing. The sensitivity refers to how strongly a system responds to these changes. Okay, obviously, it's very hard. The human could not be able to concentrate. So, sensitivity. The human brain is more sensitive if it is very hard, right? So, adaptive capacity represent the ability to cope and adapt effectively. So these are the three key elements vulnerability is composed of. Exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity is very three elements. Okay, vulnerability is composed of. Each component interacts, influencing overall system resilience. These three factors together define whether a community or ecosystem is highly vulnerable or the relatively resilient. Okay, relatively resilient. That means okay, they can able to come back to this original. I mean, they could able to cope up. Okay, so the vulnerability is a degree which is susceptible to degree to which the system is susceptible to and unable to cope up with climate impact. Okay, so at what extent is this able to withstand? After which, for example, we have ultimate stress. Okay, that means it will be able to withstand that particular amount of load. After which, what will happen? It will break, right? So the same thing. The vulnerability is a degree to which the system is susceptible to and unable to cope up with the climate susceptible to and unable to cope up with the climate impact. Coming to the exposure as a component, exposure refers to climate stresses such as rising temperature, changing rainfall, flood and drought. Systems facing frequent and intense climate changes are more exposed. For example, Himalayan regions depending on glaciers are highly exposed to the melting ice. Okay, exposure is both physical and temporal climate condition. Okay, physical and temporal. Extreme events like cyclones amplify the exposures. Mapping exposures helps policymakers target regions needing urgent climate interventions. Coming to the sensitivity of the system, the degree of the response of the system to climate shift is a sensitivity. Sensitivity is a degree of response of the system. So how the system responds back. Okay. So if it is even the small changes in climate is responding in a negative way, or even to certain level it could be able to withstand. For example, any living beings, okay, even for a human, okay, we could able to very well can live between 20 to 35 degrees celsius, okay. But if it is too hot or if it is too cold, the human need a extra protection or what you call things, okay, need to withstand that one. If it is too hot, for example 100 degrees, just imagine the human could not able to survive, right? So sensitivity is a degree of response of a system to climate shift. Direct effects include reduced crop yield due to rising temperature. Indirect effect include coastal flooding from sea level rise. So if we are direct effect, if there is climate shift is increasing, okay, so what will happen? Direct effect include reduced crop yield. The the cultivated crop will be the efficient, I mean the production will be less due to the rising temperature. Indirect effects include coastal flooding. It will increase the low-lying countries may submerge. Sea level will increase. Agriculture, forestry, and fisheries are highly sensitive to precipitation and evaporation rate. Precipitation is a rainfall, and evaporation because of the high temperature, the water may evaporate, so that the fresh water availability will be less. Okay, so greater sensitivity implies higher vulnerability if adaptive capacity is low. So sensitivity is more, that means implies high vulnerability if adaptive capacity is low. So whether adaptive capacity is a human, for example, just imagine a human could be able to adapt to a situation. Okay, so if it's very hard, obviously human could not able to withstand. The adaptive capacity is low. Okay, so for a high vulnerability. Okay, so greater sensitivity implies higher vulnerability if adaptive capacity is low. Understanding sensitivity allows prioritization of vulnerable sectors like food and water. Adaptive capacity. So, what is adaptive capacity? It is a system ability to adjust to climate change and minimize damages. So, for example, human adjust to the situation, adjust to the climate change. It's the adaptive capacity. How maximum it can able to adjust. Okay, to the climate change. Adaptive capacity. It includes infrastructure, knowledge, economic strength, and institutional support. Okay, so wealthier and technologically advanced societies generally have higher adaptive capacity. Okay, infrastructure, wealthier. So, for example, if it is too hot, even at 35, 40 degrees Celsius, we have air conditioner, we could be able to withstand. So, since the people could be able to offer the air conditioner, the technology is there, okay, as well as the what you call the wealth is there to buy that particular air conditioner. Okay, wealthier and technology. Develop advances and technologically advanced societies generally have higher adaptive capacity. So even the climate change, that isn't bother. But just imagine the people in the third world country have been living in a roadside. Okay, then how they will adapt to this situation. Okay, hope you understood. So always relate the subject to the real scenario. Okay, that's a global climate change is our issues. Okay, so we need to relate to the thing. Obviously, it will be easy for you to understand. So the vulnerability is you could not able to withstand. Okay, that's the thing. Vulnerable groups such as the poor, elderly, indigenous, and sick often lack this capacity. Okay, understood. So adaptive capacity enables society to benefit from climate opportunities while reducing the risk. Building adaptive capacity is central to resilience planning. Okay, building adaptive capacity is central to the resilient planning. Again, come back to the original question. Resilience is come back to the resilience planning means again come back. Okay, building adaptive capacity. So adaptive capacity, even though the changes happens, okay, we will able to neglect that effect. Okay, by adapting ourselves, by applying a technology or by means of knowledge or by means of the economic means. Okay, so barriers and limits to adaptation. Describe despite adaptation potential, significant barriers exist. So even you have a adaptive capacity is more, adaptive potential is more. Okay, even have a significant barrier exists. Physical and ecological limit. Some ecosystem cannot recover from extreme change. Okay, so let's say you have a rose. The rose, if you keep it at 35 degrees Celsius, what will happen? It will not grow in a normal tropical region. It will be in the hill station or what do you call it, very low climate only. I mean, it doesn't need more water. At the same time, it doesn't need no need more sun, right, for plantation of rose. Okay, so obviously that will subject to a very sensitive. I mean, the adaptation potential is very low for the that particular plant, because if the sunrise is more, obviously the what do you call it, intensity, sun intensity is more, obviously it will not grow. Some ecosystem cannot recover from extreme change. Okay, physical and ecological limit, cognitive barriers, lack of awareness among policymakers and managers delay action, informational barriers, socio-economic constraint and development pathways also shape the adaptation success or failure. Barriers and limit to the adaptation. Importance of vulnerability assessment. Why we need to do this vulnerability assessment? So we are talking about the framework for vulnerability assessment, right? So why we need to do it? That is a very important question here. Vulnerability assessment are essential for informed climate planning. They help governments integrate climate concerns into development policies. They highlight the risk to sustainable development, including food security and poverty reduction. Assessments support risk management by identifying the key vulnerabilities. They enable prioritization of vulnerable regions and sectors. By quantifying risk, they guide resource allocation and strategic intervention effectively. Coming to the policy and planning relevance, climate vulnerability assessment guide adaptation policy formulation. Policymakers can identify the hotspots needing immediate intervention. Integration into development plans ensures climate resilience in infrastructure projects. Risk analysis promotes preparedness of extreme events. They also enable better governance through evidence based decision making. International bodies use vulnerability results to allocate climate finance equitably. So international bodies use vulnerability results. Okay, how vulnerable they are. I mean, how they are going to get affected. Okay, okay, they could not be able to come back to the things. How use vulnerability results to allocate the climate finance equitably. Okay, so coming to the key vulnerabilities, glacial basins. Let's say many communities depend on a glacial meltwater for fresh water. So it's a ice. Okay, glacial basins is it's like a small river. Okay, where you will have ice float on the top. It will be moving, right? So many regions, glacial basins are around. They are depending on the fresh water because of the melt of that glaciers. Okay, many communities depend on the glacial meltwater for fresh water. Regions like Himalaya region, Andes, and Hindu Kush are at high risk. Okay, so this is a glacial basins is melting. Okay, so melting glaciers threaten long-term water scarcity because the people will be very fast melting of these glaciers. Obviously, the water scarcity may arise. So melting glaciers threaten long-term security. Okay, water security. Some small glaciers may disappear within decades. This will impact irrigation, hydropower, and drinking water for millions. So just imagine the people who have been depending on the glaciers, okay, or glacier basins. Okay, if this all melt and vanishes, obviously the people they are depending on that particular region may be getting affected. Okay, this need to be is a threatened one, right? So the people will be easily getting affected. Drought risk will intensify, making glacial basins a top climate vulnerability zone. Okay, underline the word top climate vulnerability zone. So key vulnerabilities, coastal areas. So coastal regions are highly vulnerable due to the sea level rise and storm surges. Impact include groundwater salinization, erosion, and flooding of settlements. Okay, groundwater salinization. That means the salinity, the groundwater will become saline. That means, as I told you in the last lecture, the coastal region there will be a backflow. So seawater will intrude into the groundwater and it becomes saline, and people will be getting affected. Infrastructure in low-lying deltas and the islands faces is a existential threat. Coastal megacities face severe risk to housing, transport, and health. Rising sea levels could displace millions globally. Adaptation requires coastal defenses, managed retreat, and sustainable land use planning. Key vulnerabilities: arid and semi-arid region, so where you will don't find heavy, I mean rainfall. Okay, arid region is very randomly you will get a rainfall. Semi-arid is partially you will get only rainfall. So regions like Africa and Mediterranean are highly climate sensitive. Rising temperature worsen water scarcity and desertification. So that leads to the desertification, become a barren land and become a desert. Okay, drought frequently and frequency and severity are projected to increase. Okay, these are the key vulnerabilities. Arid in semi-arid regions, over exploitation of water resources worsen vulnerability. So if the vulnerability is more worsen, the adaptive capacity will be very low. That's what we have seen, right? So the weak governance and poverty compound risk in this region. So we need to take adaptive, the policy making in order to overcome this vulnerability. Otherwise, what will happen? Obviously, the situation become worst. Long-term adaptation requires water efficient agriculture and improved governance. Key vulnerabilities in the agriculture area, as I told you, I will discuss about the key vulnerabilities in agriculture, ecosystem, and human health. Okay, in the first slide, the same thing we are going to discuss now here. The smallholder agriculture in low latitude regions is most at risk. Even moderate temperature increases 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, reduce cereal yields significantly. So you may think actually what will happen if there is only 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. Every year it has been increased to 1.5 degrees Celsius minimum because of the global warming. Just imagine. Food security is threatened by lower production and higher prices because some type of crops only will be cultivated in that particular maximum temperature. If the climate is more, obviously the temperature is more, obviously the cultivation, the production will be very less. That will leads to the food scarcity. Okay, the food security is threatened. Dependence on the rain dependence on rain forming increases risk. Vulnerability includes impacts on trade, storage, and aid distribution. Okay, include impact on trade. So vulnerability include impact on trade. So if you have a more cultivation, okay, obviously you can sell it for the other countries. If even you don't have enough food, what is the thing? You need to import. We could not able to export. So obviously the trade will be affected. The storage capacity. Okay, so vulnerability includes impact on trade, storage, and aid distribution. So if you have enough, then only you could go for aid distribution, right? If some other region is getting affected, okay, usually the national government of India used to give a lot of aid actually to the what do you call the naturally calamities happen region. Okay, for example, if it is flood or what do you call the tsunami or cyclone, the government will give a aid distribution. Okay, vulnerability includes impacts on aid distribution. Even the other yeah, the other country, other part of the land is also affected. Then how they will help you actually. In fact, okay, the adaptation needs include crop diversification. Adaptation need to include crop diversification, irrigation, and resilient seed varieties. So resilient planning is very very important. Crop diversification. Okay, so we need to go for example, this crop will give you with a less amount of with the need of less amount of water. This give you a more yield. Obviously, because of the scarcity of amount of water available, we can go for the other different types of crop to cultivate the thing. Crop diversification. Okay, irrigation. Irrigation is very important and resilient seed varieties. Okay, and key vulnerabilities on the ecosystem and biodiversity. Climate change alters hydrological regimes, threatening biodiversity. Freshwater ecosystem risk species extinction and habitat loss. Some regions may see species richness increase while others decline. For example, Northern Europe may benefit while Southwest Europe suffers loss. Some regions may see species richness increase while others decline. So, different on the region. Okay, so the ecosystem may get affected, or some people region may get benefit, some region. For example, if there is heavy rainfall, okay, those who people will have a very arid region. Okay, they will get benefited. If it is already lot of water sources is that it may get flooded. Obviously, that is getting affected. Okay, one region may get a benefit, one region may get a losses. Loss of biodiversity reduces ecological resilience. Adaptation involves habitat protection, conservation policies, and ecosystem restoration. Key vulnerabilities for human health. Public health is highly vulnerable to climate variability. As I told you, it is very hard. Okay, we could not able to concentrate, we could not able to study, we could not able to do the things. Okay, so we don't feel comfort, right? So that is the one thing. The human health, the human potential is getting affected. Limited access to health care worsen impact. Climate change alters disease pattern. Example, malaria spread. So just imagine if it is a lot of malaria, the flooding takes place. Obviously, a lot of mosquitoes may breed. Okay, even the sand, the sand, what do you call it? Sewage has been not flowing. Okay, it has been stagnant. What will happen? Malaria, there is a spread of malaria. Okay, because of the breeding of mosquitoes, and that will go come and bite the humans. Obviously, it will be affected. So this all will need to take care of. So in the well-developed nation, they don't. They will have a closed drainage. They have a different drainage system. Different what do you call sewage system. Okay, rainwater for rainwater harvesting. They will have a different sewer line. I mean, a pipeline, and whereas the sewer line will be different. Okay, so but in India, like developing nations, we don't have a segregation. Even some countries, third world nation, they don't have even a drainage facilities itself. They just dump it to the ground directly to the ground. Okay, so these are all the things. Okay, so the climate change alters disease pattern. Example, malaria spread, heat waves increase mortality, death in vulnerable population. So the hot stroke may arise. Okay, the old people have been advised not to travel and not to walk during the very hot summer. Okay, because of the heat waves, what will happen? They will get a hot heat stroke. Okay, so not only old people, even for the child, have been asked to be sitting inside the houses. Okay, during the very hot summer, during the peak hours of 11 to 2 or 11 to 3. Okay, so poor sanitation and water scarcity cause outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Strengthening healthcare infrastructure is important for adaptive capacity, and key vulnerabilities infrastructure and settlement, how the infrastructure is getting affected because of the climate change. Okay, infrastructure is exposed to extreme weather impacts, flooding damage, roads, bridges, and drainage systems. Urban settlements face higher risk due to population density. Transportation delays and economic losses are projected to rise. Without adaptation, damages may double in some areas. Resilient infrastructure planning and smart urban design are critical. Coming to the challenges in vulnerability assessment, assessment face data gaps due to shrinking monitoring networks. So why we need to go for a assessment, vulnerability assessment? Then only we could able to understand the effect, the maximum effect. So vulnerability assessment is one of the challenges. What are the factors which need to be considered? Okay, in assessing the vulnerability. Assessment face data gaps due to shrinkage monitoring networks. So the if you don't have data, obviously that will assessment face data gaps due to shrinkage monitoring network. We are not monitoring properly. Okay, climate models have uncertainties in predicting precipitation. Climate models need lot of data. Okay, have uncertainties in predicting the precipitation. So it will not correctly predict because the data given to the climate model is not correct, or the climate model need to be updated. There are some important factors which may be missed out. Okay, so the scale mismatch between the climate and hydrological models complicate the analysis. Land use change and socio-economic factors interact with climate, adding complexity. Many adaptation costs remain unquantified, creating uncertainty. Many adaptation costs remains unquantified and creating uncertainty. Interdisciplinary collaboration is needed for some more accurate assessment. So you need to have a interdisciplinary collaboration to get the particular data and then go for the assessment. Adaptation approaches to improve the assessment. So these are the lacks, data gaps. Okay, and there is no interdisciplinary collaboration. Okay, this all will help you to the challenges in the vulnerability assessment. But how to improve this assessment? Strengthening data collection and monitoring of water quality and hydrology. Data collection is very important, that need to be strengthened. Improving climate and hydrological models. So as I told you, the models have insufficient data, or the it does not incorporate the factors which need to be predicted correctly. Okay, so that data is missing. Improving climate and hydrological models for regional decision making, using scenario based and probabilistic approach for risk management, promoting integrated assessment across economic, social, and environmental dimensions, enhancing research on understudied areas like groundwater. Long term field experiments can provide critical evidence for adaptive planning. So, to improve the assessment, we need to go for a data collection, improving the climate models and predict the things, using scenario based and probabilistic approach, and also promoting integrated assessment across economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Conclusions. So the framework for assessment, vulnerability assessment, why we need to do. Okay, that's what we have been studying this lecture. Okay, this lecture is about assessment for vulnerability assessment. Okay, framework for vulnerability assessment. Assessment. Climate vulnerability is a multidimensional and evolving challenge. Exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity together define risk. Vulnerability assessment gave adaptation and policy intervention. Key vulnerabilities include water, agriculture, health, and ecosystem, which we have seen. Uncertainties remain but can be reduced with better data and modeling. So uncertainties will remain but can be improved. A structured framework enables societies to build resilience and safeguard future generation. So the resilience planning, okay, that because of that we are doing this framework for vulnerability assessment. Okay, that will help you to understand the how to regain back or how to adapt ourselves to a changes in the pattern. Okay, hope with this I just conclude my section. Hope I can catch you in next lecture very shortly. Thank you.